Things were great between Serafina and me once. We'd have dinners where we'd lose track of time, talking about everything under the sun. Movies we'd watch on a whim. Dumb little weekend hikes, just the two of us complaining about mosquitoes as we laughed about work bullshit. Back then, there was no real line between where my day ended and hers began. It was just life, messy and sometimes chaotic. But it worked. We respected each other's space but never felt distant. And yeah, sometimes we'd bicker over dumb things, like me taking too long with the code or her being too invested in some corporate drama. But it was just white noise. Something we brushed off quickly because we had each other. That was before lockdown, before everything was just different. When lockdown hit, wasn't immediate, you know. The slow build of tension feels invisible at first. I guess it started with the space we shared. It was subtle, Serafina stopping by my desk in the middle of a video meeting, laughing as she grabbed a snack, not giving it a second thought. And sure, I laughed it off the first few times. Hell, I even joked about it with her afterwards. But it got old faster than I ever thought it would. I can't cope with distractions like that. I need to focus, block everything out. Especially when I'm remote where it's harder to get in the zone. Still, she didn't get it. Not really. I'd see her lounging in the living room, rubbing her eyes after a nap, pajamas hanging off her like it was still a weekend. Meanwhile, I was up at 7, coffee already brewing, putting on a button-up shirt even if no one would see me. I figured looking the part helped. It was hard to watch her glide through things like it was all fine. And maybe for her it was. Her job was different. She'd just hop on a couple Zoom calls, bark a few managerial orders, and then have the rest of the day to herself. It's not like coding. Not like solving actual puzzles where your head's at full steam for hours. I don't think she ever got that. Or maybe she did, but didn't care because her results came with a much bigger paycheck. I shrugged the odd bits off at first. Thought maybe I was overreacting. Okay, sure, we'd work differently, but we'd always been wired that way. The structure I've got. It's not something I can switch off. It's who I am. But those easy routines we had started to break down, sharpened by being crammed in the same few rooms every day. At some point, she stopped commenting on my all-day grind and I stopped mentioning her midday naps. The real shift came when her office reopened. She practically leapt at the chance to get back in. I remember her throwing on a formal coat the first day she went back, as if she had been waiting to drape authority back onto her, while I sat there in sweatpants, still coding away, still stuck where I started. I hadn't realized how much I relied on those slow mornings together until she wasn't there. She'd leave before I was up, return late, too late some nights, always with these stories of new colleagues she met, these after-hours drinks that made me feel like I was just the guy who kept her bed warm. I hated that feeling. Sure, I'd try to bring it up. Genuinely tried. Asked if we could have one of those old movie nights we used to have, or take that hike we'd always talked about. But half the time it was I'm too tired, or we can plan something next weekend. A vague, placating answer that never turned into an actual plan. Plans that never came. I found myself in this odd routine, sitting at my desk, tapping away at code, occasionally looking up to see if she'd text or try to reconnect. And often enough, it would only be some picture of her at a bar with the new group at work. Or worse, updating me on the meeting she crushed, another step toward the next corporate rung. Good for her. I told myself with forced enthusiasm, trying to shake off the unease building in the pit of my stomach. Once, I offhandedly mentioned that it seemed like she was getting close with this one coworker. Eric, I think his name was. She laughed, not in a dismissive way, but as if it wasn't even a question. We've been spending a lot of time at home, she said. I think we could use some space. It's not a big deal. The words crawled under my skin and settled there. Stuck. I couldn't shake them no matter how much I chewed on it. There was space, all right. Just not the kind she seemed to be referring to. I started feeling sidelined. She stopped asking how my projects were going, how a finished program had solved the issue way better than expected. Stuff we used to talk about at length, where she'd actively engage. Now, it all just hung in the air like it wasn't important. Like I wasn't important. I wanted to talk things out, sit down, fix whatever was snapping between us, but each attempt bounced off her like a ball against a wall. I stopped pushing, mostly because I was afraid of what I might hear if I really pressed. What if this, the late nights, the quiet between us when she was home, was just normal now? I didn't want to face that. We still had moments, sure. A laugh over dinner, something we both vibed with during one of those random shows on Netflix. but it felt like the us part was getting hollowed out, bit by bit. Sometimes it felt like she wanted to leave me all the leftover pieces, while the parts that mattered, the passion, the energy, were being spent elsewhere. I'd stare at my monitor, lines of code blurring as I tried to focus, my mind drifting back to those carefree weekend hikes, or the way we lost time together. That's when it hit me. The connection, the conversations that meant something more, they weren't there anymore. Serafina had become someone else, or maybe I had. Maybe it had always been there, this gap between us, masked by the routines we were so used to. The morning started like any other in our new normal. Serafina bustled around the kitchen in her work-from-home attire, somehow managing to look put together, in casual clothes. I sat at my desk, debugging code when she approached with her iPad in hand. "Hey, could you help me with something? I want to give this to Emma for her birthday. Can you wipe it clean?" I nodded, taking the device. "Sure, shouldn't take long. Any data you need to save first?" "No, I've already backed up what I need." The process was routine. I'd done it countless times before. But as I navigated through the settings, a notification popped up. A messaging app I didn't recognize was still running in the background. My finger hovered over the close button when a preview caught my eye. My stomach dropped. The message contained a photo, one that made my blood run cold. Serafina, my wife. In poses meant for someone else. The recipient's name made it worse. Marcus' work. My hands trembled as I opened the app. The messages went back months. Photos, intimate conversations, plans for meetups during late meetings. Everything spun around me as I scrolled through evidence of her betrayal. The room felt too hot, then too cold. I could hear Serafina humming in the kitchen, probably on another conference call, completely unaware that her carefully constructed lie was unraveling. I forced myself to think clearly through the fog of shock. With mechanical precision, I connected the iPad to my computer and created backups of everything. Each file felt like another twist of the knife, but I knew I needed proof. When I finished, I opened my browser in incognito mode and searched for divorce lawyers in our area. My fingers moved automatically, sending emails to schedule consultations, all while Serafina's voice drifted from the other room, laughing at something someone said in her meeting, probably him. I reset the iPad as requested, erasing the evidence from the device but not from my mind or my backups. When I returned it to her, my voice remained steady somehow. "All done. It's ready for Emma now." She smiled, thanked me, and went back to her call. She had no idea that I now carried the weight of her secret, that everything had just changed irrevocably. I'm not sure what part of me thought it was a good idea to go through her iPad that night, but I guess if I had to pinpoint it, the moment started when she walked in, still smelling of cheap wine and something like a smug grin plastered on her face. She didn't even bother to acknowledge me beyond a barely noticeable nod, disappearing into the bedroom, like I was some fixture in the corner of the apartment we used to own together. She had done it so many times by now. After the lockdown adaptation, she'd call it, just slipping into her work emails and video calls while I clung to any sense of routine that could keep me sane. I don't know why I took her iPad. Maybe the months of watching her act more like a stranger than a wife had finally cracked something inside me. Finding those photos, the flirty messages with Marcus, that was just the confirmation. I wasn't paranoid. A part of me had hoped I was wrong, had wanted to just walk away, put it back, and never think about it again. But the muffled sound of her laughing in the distance killed that hope. She never laughed like that around me anymore. The lawyer was blunt. "You can feel whatever you need to feel, Nikolai. But that doesn't help us build a case. That's where this investigator comes in. We can't afford to fuck this up." He was right, of course. I knew that. Emotion or not, I needed logic, careful steps. I wasn't an idiot. Weeks of letting her leave for yet another work meeting or late client dinner, all while I pretended everything was fucking fine, took its toll. Every lie felt like sand slipping through my fingers, and it made me furious, but more than that, it fed into this cold determination. The investigators started quietly. Emails, calls, screenshots, all things I remembered downloading, adding to that growing folder on my laptop that I'd never admit existed. She was careful, but not careful enough. The proof piled up faster than I expected. Marcus wasn't subtle either, it seemed. I almost felt sorry. But any sympathy I might have had was dying under this new, sharp bitterness creeping in every day she walked in, like nothing happened. Like I wasn't even there at all. It got worse over time, the time apart growing longer, her texts less frequent, more dismissive. And when she was here, it was worse than silence. It was like being in the same room as somebody living in a completely different universe. The thing about anger is how it sits in your chest for a long time without needing much attention until something tips it over. Like a too-full cup you didn't realize had been filling. That night when she walked in late, glancing my way with that casual disinterest, I could barely hold it. She smelled like Marcus. The investigator didn't need to confirm it. Hell, the overwhelming stench of perfume that wasn't hers was enough of a red flag. She made her way into the kitchen, fetching herself a glass of wine, humming under her breath like nothing was wrong. Everything inside me twisted. Each move she made just set me off more, like watching a fire climb steadily, waiting for the right gust of air. The worst part, the indifference. She wasn't even trying to lie anymore. She didn't care. I stood there, watching her pour her drink, my mouth going dry with everything I'd held in. It poured out before I could hold it back anymore. You know I'm not fucking blind, right? The glass stopped halfway to her lips, but she didn't put it down, turning to glance over her shoulder with disinterest, like I was a kid throwing a tantrum. She didn't speak at first, just raised an eyebrow, sipping her wine as though I didn't deserve an answer. You think I don't know about Marcus? About the affair you've decided is more important than fixing us? That was the first time in weeks she actually laughed in front of me. Not some coy smile like before. No, this was hollow, like I'd said something so stupid she didn't even need to consider it. If you're going to accuse me of something, at least make it interesting, Nikolai. Where's your proof? I could feel my throat tighten, every muscle in my body tense, like I was about to launch across the room at something. But her voice, that cold, belittling tone, it rang in my ears. You know what? I'm done. She barely glanced at me, setting her glass down before staring at her nails like the state of her manicure held more weight than my words. You're so small-minded. Always have been. You're upset because I have what I want. I get to have a career and Marcus. Why not both? You think I'd settle for? She waved a hand dismissively, just this. Somewhere in those words, something snapped. The part of me that tried to make sense of this, the part that waited for normalcy to come back, it was gone. The lawyer didn't like the cake idea. If you want divorce papers served quietly and cleanly, fine. But if you're going to stage some elaborate public humiliation, anything goes wrong, and it's on you. That didn't matter. Every time she'd floated around the house like nothing happened, every scoff, every glance served like knives, there was no going back. I designed the cake myself. Deep blue, the kind that catches everyone's attention by virtue of contrast. The base stood tall and solid with a snapshot of her and Marcus, one of their cozy little lunches the investigator just happened to catch. There, right on the frosting next to their happy faces, here's your cake, eat it too. The company delivering it didn't ask too many questions. They cared more about differential pricing for rush orders than awkward situations with cheating spouses. Sure, the lawyer said a spectacle wouldn't make me look great, but at this point, did I care how I looked? My marriage had turned into a circus of whispered gasps and headaches, and Serafina didn't give a damn about me. Why should I tiptoe around this any longer? I was sitting at my desk, not working. The code on my screen had frozen in place hours ago, but I hadn't moved. My cursor blinked like a metronome, counting out the time I had spent thinking about whether I'd gone too far, or maybe not far enough. Another sip of coffee. Another glance at my phone, waiting for it to buzz. When it finally did, it was clinical efficient. A text from the process server. It read, "It's done. Happened just like you wanted." Not even a second after reading it, my phone chimed again. A photo attached this time. It showed the cake, a huge, obnoxiously pink thing with icing that spelled out, in all caps, "Congratulations on your affair with Marcus." Below the words, I had instructed they place that one picture. The one she had sent Marcus sitting on our bed, our fucking bed, in lingerie he had probably picked out. The very photo he had laughed at when I confronted her. Well, they weren't laughing now. The process server didn't stick around long after that, just long enough to describe how it all went down. Serafina had been holding a meeting in some glass-paneled conference room, all corporate. You know, looking like someone's straight out of business catalog ad. The server just walked right in, cake and envelope in hand, dead center in front of her colleagues, handed her the divorce papers, revealed the cake. For a second, I could imagine her just frozen as she read what was on top, maybe her face trying to hide the horror, pretending like it wasn't real. But then, this part got me though. I guess she completely lost it. She couldn't keep the cool exterior anymore. According to the server, she grabbed the cake with both hands and slammed it right onto the fucking floor, smearing icing and pieces of it all over her shoes and the office carpet. Her co-workers just sat there, stunned, mouths open. The picture of her and Marcus on top had somehow stayed intact though, lying amid the wreckage like a little beacon of truth among the chaos. She lost her shit. Yelling, red-faced rage, swatting at anyone who tried to ask her what was going on. In that moment, reading the description, I couldn't help myself. I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction. This was me fighting back against her betrayal, my way of retaliating for months of lies, deceit, and the utter fucking callousness she'd shown when I found out. I pictured her standing there, humiliated, that perfect corporate facade cropped for facade, all those eyes on her. It gave me a sick kind of power. But the feeling didn't last long. It was strange, like the rush of adrenaline you get after a fistfight. Your emotions are all over the place, elation, anger, satisfaction. But then when that fades, you feel kind of sick, hollow. I stared at the text from the server, rereading his words over and over. The high quickly wearing down, reality settling in. I had torn into a world in the most public, brutal way possible. But what the hell did I accomplish? The phone buzzing again snapped me out of it. This time it wasn't the process server. It was a follow-up from my lawyer, well, more like a warning. In her cold legalese, she reminded me that such public humiliation stunts could backfire in a divorce case. I could imagine lawyers eating this up in court. An immature, vengeful husband who settled his grievances with a cake rather than handling it with dignity. For a moment, panic crept in, like I had ripped open a hornet's nest and now couldn't stop them coming at me. Had I just given Serafina the ammunition she needed to take me down? I tossed the phone to the side after that. The coffee tasted like shit. Cold, bitter, burnt. I stood from my desk and paced the length of the living room. This was the same house we had bought together just a few years ago. The kitchen counter still had marked scratches from when we tried to assemble flat-pack furniture ourselves. The dining table we barely used. The couch where we used to just sit and talk. Actually talk about anything and everything. Now, all this place felt like was an empty shell, reminders of who I thought we were. I sat down on the couch, sinking into the cushions. It felt almost too quiet now, like I was hearing every little creak of the building, the hum of my refrigerator. Static filled the silence in my head like I was brooding over what had happened but spiraling nowhere at the same time. I was angry, sure. But this wasn't anger anymore. I had done it. I got my revenge, she deserved it. I kept telling myself, but now thinking it back, was throwing a cake at her in front of her co-workers really the victory I had imagined? Was my plan, the one I had carefully crafted, really as clever as I thought it would be? I stood up again, trying to shake the creeping doubt. I had wanted it to hit her hard, to make her feel the crushing sense of defeat I felt when I found those messages and photos. I thought it'd give me closure, some sense that I had taken back control. But now, shit, it just felt more pathetic. It just laid bare how deeply her actions had affected me. I realized, standing in that empty living room, that the cake hadn't closed anything. It just opened more wounds, maybe for both of us. I was still checked out from my workday, standing there in front of these reminders. The silence of the house felt more suffocating. There was no one here now, just me. Her stuff was all still out where she'd left it. The throw blanket neatly folded on the couch, her running shoes under the front hall table, like everything was perfectly in place, as if nothing had happened. The only thing missing was Serafina. I picked up my phone again, scrolling through unread messages and then stopping on that last thread from my lawyer. Was this going to make things worse? Was I really going to come out of this unscathed? Did I just blow up my own case for some temporary satisfaction? If it went to court, could this be used to paint me as some unstable asshole? I didn't have an answer, and I was alone with no one to bounce these thoughts off, no way to know if I'd really made the right move. Not that it mattered. Serafina's messages started piling up within hours after the cake incident. Her number flashed on my phone over and over, like some relentless nagging. She started with a predictable "how could you" and escalated to "let's talk," all the way to demanding explanations. I didn't even bother looking at the rest. Something inside me, cold, almost mechanical, flipped the switch. I blocked her number before her frantic desperation could simmer into voice messages or more invasive pleas. It wasn't that I didn't expect this. Serafina had always been a firecracker, brushing off red flags until they turned into full-on threats to her pristine world. I could almost picture her sitting there, maybe in her annoying corner nook where she always arranged her glossy work papers, cursing under her breath at those stupid texts. Maybe that little bit of public humiliation she'd thrive on during office parties exploded in her face. Too bad, Serafina. You made your choices. The house felt like an unfamiliar place now, a claustrophobic nest of lingering conversations, smells and routines that no one was ever going to resume. The kitchen had that morning after sense of stillness. Her mug wasn't placed on the counter in its usual spot, almost like none of it mattered anymore. It was silly. But I'd even started neglecting opening the blinds after she'd left. The light aggravated me. I sat at my desk, staring at the screens, code blurring with the notifications pinging in the corner of my monitor. Even work felt disconnected. The motions were there, but I was somewhere else. I found myself scrolling aimlessly between tabs, as though some answers waited somewhere online, a digital exorcism to rid me of Serafina's betrayal. Nothing came through but static. White noise. Eventually, I just got the hell out. Grabbed the keys and drove away from the city. Couldn't go back to work. Couldn't go home and face that empty shell of a marriage. Lines of trees and some cornfields blurred into one another as I drove past mile after mile of that rural stretch on 44. No real destination in mind, just needed space air. I breathed better with each highway sign that ticked by. My phone rested in the cup holder. Muted now, but it was still there. The block's number just aimed in the background like a ghost lingering in the passenger seat. There was something about the freedom of leaving town behind, even for a couple of hours. It was the way the open fields didn't care about anyone's crap, I guess. A couple of miles out, I spotted an old wooden sign. Breed of golden retrievers. It sat crooked, half-coated in dirt. I don't know why, but I pulled over and drove down the muddy road leading to a quaint farmhouse. When I stepped out of the car, the smell of damp earth hit. The barking, weirdly comforting. It was nice hearing something just going about their life carefree. The breeder lady, middle-aged, jean jumper, chewing on gum, showed me the pups. There was one. Quiet, just sticking to its spot while the others piled over each other, brown eyes calm as hell. It occurred to me that this pup wasn't like Serafina, no complicated bullshit, no under-the-surface agendas. Just sitting there, waiting for who knows what. Thinking of getting one? She asked, already reading into my hesitant stare. I don't know, I said, bending down to let the pup sniff my hand. Just needed to clear my head. Dogs do that, she smiled, watching him tilt his head while taking me in. Maybe it was an impulse, but every fiber in me wanted to feel that connection again. Something simple. Loyal. That mattered now more than ever. Yet no, I wasn't ready. I shook my head. Less for the breeder and more for myself. I told her I'd think about it and headed back to the car. The drive felt quieter on the way back, almost too silent, considering where things stood now. The lawyer made it worse. He recommended I attend this mandatory counseling session, even though I was dragging my feet about it, claiming how it strengthened cases in court and helped wrap up loose ends. Fine. Whatever. So, I showed up. Fine. It was run via Zoom, of course, because why not add layers of distance to an already emotionally cold affair? The therapist, some mid-40s guy with bouncy optimism, jumped right into it, acting like this would all somehow fix things. That we'd see the light and patch up the gaping chasm between us with some feel-good revelations. Serafina, unsurprisingly, jumped right in. She spun her version of the story, career stress, feeling undervalued, and then came the vague bits about loneliness. I stared blankly at the screen, waiting for the part where she would maybe, just maybe, acknowledge what the hell set this whole mess aflame. The therapist wasn't having any of that, though. He gave me that pseudo-empathetic head tilt and suggested the distance between us, according to Serafina, made her feel unseen, like she got swept aside in the middle of all my structured, ordered lifestyle. She hasn't been honest. That should matter, I shot back. He nodded, jotted something down in his notes. I guess. Looked almost as if he had encountered this thousands of times, and was ready with some pre-packaged response. We can't ignore the choices she's made, he said. But often these dynamics aren't so black and white. Even hearing him talk made me feel like I wasn't in that room, wasn't even part of the conversation. A third party being dissected, reduced to some emotionally unavailable stereotype. Sure. Label me. It wouldn't change what Serafina did. and frankly, at that moment, I just didn't give a crap. She finally spilled over, words stumbling out fast, raw with an edge of desperation. Gestured wildly, welling up. Cliché as it gets. What's it gonna take, Nikolai? She leaned closer to her screen. Glitching in the process. If we try this again. Like really try. What would it take to even get you to a second session? Took a lot, really, to just stay composed. I was done. Empty. I just looked at her, maybe for longer than I'd planned because silence fell for a good few moments. Good night, I said. Then clicked out. That was it, wasn't it? There wasn't anything left. The therapist's frozen face disappeared with the log-off chime, but the cold distance it left behind, that felt right. Right. The meeting with my lawyer was supposed to be straightforward, but her words hit harder than expected. Sarah, a sharp-minded attorney with decades of experience, leaned forward in her leather chair and fixed me with a stern look. The cake stunt. Not your finest moment. We need to pivot hard towards being the reasonable party here. I nodded, throat tight. The satisfaction from that public revelation had long since faded, leaving only a hollow feeling in my gut. From now on, everything goes through me. No direct contact with Serafina, no responding to provocations, nothing. The courts want to see adults, not high school drama. She pulled out a thick folder, spreading various documents across her mahogany desk. Each paper represented another piece of my marriage being dismantled, categorized, and divided. Property assessments, bank statements, retirement accounts, our life together reduced to numbers and legal terminology. I know it's difficult, but we need to play this smart. Your evidence of her infidelity is solid, but judges don't care about revenge stories. They care about fair division of assets and responsible behavior during proceedings. Back at home, I found myself standing in my kitchen, staring at the empty space where Sarah Fuffy Maker used to sit. The silly, overpriced thing she'd insisted on buying because it matched her office aesthetic. Now gone. Like so many other pieces of our shared life. The house felt different now. Quieter, but not in the peaceful way I'd always craved during our marriage. This silence carried weight, filled with the echoes of conversations we should have had years ago. All those moments when we'd chosen comfortable lies over uncomfortable truths. I pulled up the local shelter's website again, scrolling through available dogs. A German Shepherd mix caught my eye. Something about his steady gaze reminded me of my childhood dog. Unlike Serafina's constant need for status and validation, a dog's loyalty came without pretense or conditions. The truth hit me then. Sitting alone in my half-empty house, Serafina's affair wasn't the cause of our breakdown, but rather a symptom. We'd been living parallel lives, connected by routine rather than genuine understanding. Her ambition had always clashed with my preference for stability. My focus on meaningful work versus her desire for status symbols. These weren't just differences, they were fundamental incompatibilities we'd ignored for too long. The marriage counselor's words from our last session echoed in my mind. Sometimes relationships end not because anyone failed, but because people grow in different directions. At the time, it felt like a cop-out. Now, watching the last rays of sunlight fade through my office window, those words carried a different weight. A weight of truth, and maybe even a hint of freedom. I closed the pet adoption tab but bookmarked it for later. The time wasn't right yet, but soon. First, I needed to finish untangling the mess of our marriage to find solid ground again. My attorney Sarah was right. Taking the high road wasn't just about legal strategy. It was about choosing who I wanted to be moving forward. The memories of Serafina, our first date, our wedding day, even the good moments during lockdown, they still lived in these walls. But they felt more like old photographs now, losing their power to wound. What remained was a clearer vision of the future, one built on authenticity, without compromise or pretense. I opened my laptop, diving back into code. Work had always been my anchor, and now it offered something else, a reminder that I could still create, still build something meaningful, even as other parts of my life underwent demolition. Hey everyone, if you enjoyed the story, remember to like, subscribe, and comment on the video for more stories like this. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an update. If you have any similar stories to share, leave them in the comments and we'll make sure to bring them to life. Thanks for watching.